I've watched people destroy their retirement savings for 70 years, and the methods never change. They think safety comes from avoiding risk. It doesn't. Safety comes from understanding what you own and why you own it. Let me tell you about Janice Farmer from Florida. She worked at Enron for decades, trusted the company, believed in its leadership. By late 2001, her retirement savings had grown to $700,000, mostly in Enron stock. Then the company collapsed. When the dust settled, she received $20,416. That's all that remained of her $700,000 retirement. She now survives on a $63 monthly Social Security check. I cannot help but feel that I and thousands of employees like me have been lied to and we've been cheated, she testified before Congress. Janice wasn't stupid. She wasn't reckless. She simply confused comfort with security. She wanted something that felt safe, not something that actually was safe. There's a difference. And that difference destroyed 15,000 Enron employees' retirements overnight. A certificate of deposit feels safe because the number doesn't move. But if it's paying 3% while inflation runs at 5%, you're getting poorer in slow motion. That's not safety. That's suicide with a smile. Let me be absolutely clear about something. There's no such thing as a perfectly safe investment. Anyone who tells you otherwise is either ignorant or selling something. What exists are intelligent trade-offs. You can trade growth for stability. You can trade liquidity for yield. You can trade complexity for simplicity. But you cannot have maximum safety, maximum returns, and maximum liquidity all at once. The universe doesn't allow it. When people ask me about safe investments for retirement, they're usually asking the wrong question. They want me to name products. But products don't make you safe. Thinking makes you safe. The biggest risk in retirement isn't the market. It's you, your emotions, your impatience, your need to feel clever. Those kill more portfolios than any recession ever could. Now, if you can control yourself, if you can sit still when everyone else is running, if you can think clearly when fear is screaming, then these three investments will serve you well. Not because they're magic, but because they're designed for survival. The first investment every rational retiree should own is something so boring that most people can't stand it. They want excitement. They want growth. They want to feel like they're doing something clever. What they actually need is the financial equivalent of a utility company. Steady, predictable, relentlessly dull. I'm talking about dividend-paying stocks from companies that have survived every crisis you've lived through and a few you haven't. Not just any dividend stocks, the ones that have increased their payout every single year for decades. They're called dividend aristocrats. And they represent something most investors don't understand anymore: discipline. These companies don't just pay dividends when times are good. They raise them when times are bad. During the 2008 financial crisis, while banks were collapsing and the world was screaming about the end of capitalism, companies like Coca-Cola and Procter and Gamble kept raising their dividends, not because they were feeling generous, because they could, because they'd built businesses that generated cash in good times and bad. Let me tell you about G.W. Potter. He retired in 1995 with a strategy that sounded almost too simple to work. He kept 18 to 24 months of spending money in cash. The rest went into dividend aristocrats, companies that had raised their payouts for decades. When 2008 hit, his portfolio dropped like everyone else's. But here's what made the difference. He didn't have to sell a single share. He lived off his cash reserves while the storm raged. He collected his dividend checks like clockwork. And when the dust settled, his portfolio had fully recovered. As long as I can live off the dividends, he said, market fluctuations don't affect me. That's the psychology most investors never grasp. They think safety means price stability. They want stocks that don't move much. That's completely backward. Real safety is income stability. I don't care if Coca-Cola's stock price falls 30% in a year. I care whether they keep sending dividend checks. And they will, because people don't stop drinking Coke during recessions. They don't stop brushing their teeth or doing laundry. Human habits are remarkably stable, even when markets aren't. That stability is worth more than any growth stock's promise of doubling your money. Look at Johnson & Johnson. They've raised their dividend every year since 1963. That's through Vietnam, stagflation, multiple recessions, the dot-com crash, the financial crisis, and the global pandemic. If you owned that stock in retirement, you'd have collected rising income through every disaster of the last 60 years without losing a single night's sleep. Compare that to chasing the latest tech stock or cryptocurrency. You might get rich. You might also blow up. In retirement, you can't afford to blow up. You don't have time to recover. That's why boring wins. Not because it's exciting, but because it's survivable. Here's something that sounds backward, but is absolutely true. The less thrilling your investments are after 50, the more likely you'll actually enjoy a thrilling retirement. I've watched countless revolutionary companies disappear, but I've never seen Colgate-Palmolive disappear. Because teeth don't become optional. That predictability is worth paying for. When you're 75 and living on your investments, you don't want to worry whether your holdings will exist in 10 years. You want businesses with moats so wide that even terrible management couldn't sink them quickly. Consumer staples provide that. Healthcare provides that. Utilities provide that. These aren't growth engines. They're survival machines. And survival is what retirees need most. If I were building a retirement portfolio from scratch, I'd start here. 40 to 50% in a diversified basket of dividend aristocrats. Not one or two, at least 10 or 15 across different industries. This isn't about getting rich. It's about staying rich. And the best way to stay rich is to own pieces of businesses that generate cash regardless of what the economy is doing. The second investment retirees need is even simpler than the first, which is why almost nobody does it correctly. People hate simplicity in finance. They think if it's not complicated, it can't be good. That's profoundly wrong. The best ideas are usually simple. They're just hard to execute because they require patience instead of cleverness. I'm talking about index funds, specifically broad market index funds that own everything. Zero, the S&P 500, or better yet, a total market index 001 fund. Thousands of companies. No guessing required. In 1976, a man named Jack Bogle launched something Wall Street called Bogle's Folly. Zero. They said it was un-American. Zero. They mocked him relentlessly. What did he create? The first index fund available to ordinary investors, 00. A fund that simply bought every stock in the S&P 500 and held them 00. No expensive managers trying to beat the market. No fancy trading, 00. Just ownership of American business. The industry laughed. Here's what happened. Investors who put $10,000 in that fund in 1976. By 2019, they had approximately $790,000 without picking a single stock, without paying Wall Street's exorbitant fees, without losing sleep over earnings reports. When Bogle died in 2019, Warren said something that stuck with me. Jack did more for American investors as a whole than any individual I've known. He wasn't exaggerating. Bogle could have become a billionaire. Instead, he structured Vanguard so that investors owned the company. He gave up an enormous fortune to do something right for millions of people. I don't know any other story like it in American business history. Most retirees shouldn't pick individual stocks. That's not an insult. It's arithmetic. If you don't know what you're doing, stock picking is gambling. And even if you do know what you're doing, you're competing against professionals with better information, faster computers, and no mortgage payments distracting them. The odds aren't in your favor. But here's what you can do. Own all of them. When you buy an index fund, you're not betting on one company's genius or one sector's momentum. You're betting that human beings will keep waking up and trying to make money. That's a bet I'll take every time. It's worked for centuries, and it'll work for the next century too. From 1928 to now, the S&P 500 has returned about 10% annually. Not every year. Some years it falls 30 or 40%. But over decades it compounds relentlessly. And compounding is the closest thing to magic in finance. It doesn't feel magical while it's happening. It feels boring. But boring is what works. Warren and I have said this for years. The average investor would be far better off buying a low-cost index fund and doing absolutely nothing. No trading. No market timing. No listening to forecasts. Just buy and forget. The problem is people can't stand doing nothing. They need to feel productive. So they trade, they switch funds, they chase performance, and every time they do, they destroy their returns. The data is brutal. The average investor underperforms the market by several percentage points per year, not because they pick bad stocks, but because they can't sit still. They buy high when they're excited. They sell low when they're scared. Index funds solve this by making activity pointless. There's nothing to do. The fund rebalances automatically. You just sit there and let capitalism work. There's another benefit that's often overlooked. Index funds prevent you from making emotional decisions based on news. When you own individual stocks, every earnings report feels personal. Every analyst downgrade feels like an attack. With an index fund, none of that matters. You don't own any single company enough to care about its quarterly results. You just own the aggregate. And the aggregate always goes up over time, because that's how capitalism works. Bad companies die. Good companies thrive. The index automatically adjusts. If I were allocating a retiree's portfolio, I'd put 30 to 40% in a total market index fund. Low cost is critical. You want expense ratios under 0.1%. Every extra percent you pay in fees is a percent you don't get to compound. Over 30 years, fees can cost you a third of your wealth. That's not a rounding error. That's theft. The third investment retirees need is the one most people resist because it doesn't look like an investment at all. It pays no dividends. It produces no growth. It just sits there doing nothing while inflation quietly erodes its value. I'm talking about cash. Not cash under your mattress. Not cash in a checking account earning zero. Cash equivalents. Short-term treasury bills. Money market funds backed by government debt. The kind of assets you can turn into spending money in 24 hours without losing sleep. People hate holding cash in retirement. They think it's lazy. They calculate opportunity costs like it's a moral failure. They see stocks climbing and feel stupid for not being fully invested. That's exactly backward. Cash isn't dead weight. It's strategic positioning. It's your defense against being forced to do something stupid at the worst possible moment. Let me tell you what cash made possible in 2008. While everyone else was panicking, Warren had built a cash reserve of $44 billion at Berkshire. When Lehman Brothers collapsed and the world was ending, he wasn't running for the exits. He was shopping. He pumped $5 billion into Goldman Sachs when everyone thought investment banks were finished. He got preferred shares paying a 10% dividend, plus warrants for another $5 billion in common stock at a steep discount. He did the same with Bank of America, GE, and Dow Chemical. Total cash committed during the crisis, $14.5 billion. How much did he make from those crisis-era deals? Over $10 billion. Not by being lucky, by being liquid when everyone else was desperate. Be fearful when others are greedy, Warren says, and greedy only when others are fearful. Cash is how you execute that strategy. Now let me tell you what happens to retirees without cash reserves. I knew a man named Steve, 72 years old, still stocking shelves at a hardware store 3 days a week. He was supposed to retire at 65. When 2008 hit, he lost half his retirement savings overnight. His portfolio was fully invested, no cash buffer, 0, and he needed money to live. So he was forced to sell stocks at the bottom, locking in permanent losses. By the time markets recovered, 0, he'd already sold the shares that would have rebounded. He's poorer forever, not because of the crash, but because he had no cash to wait it out. Here's the cruel irony. Steve's finances actually recovered years ago. His remaining portfolio bounced back. His mortgage is paid off. He has more than enough to live comfortably, yet he still eats canned soup for dinner most nights and drives a 15-year-old Camry held together with duct tape. The 2008 crash didn't just hurt his finances. It scarred his psychology permanently. Research from Columbia University shows that people who experienced major financial loss around age 60 show reduced stock market participation for up to 30 years afterward. The emotional memory of watching savings evaporate overpowers any rational understanding that markets historically recover. Let me tell you what cash really represents. It's not about the money itself. It's about time. Cash buys you time to think, time to wait, time to let markets recover without being forced to participate in their insanity. That time is more valuable than any investment return, because the biggest mistakes in investing are almost always mistakes of timing. Buying too late, selling too early, acting when you should wait, waiting when you should act. Cash eliminates most timing mistakes by removing the pressure. You're never forced to act. You can always afford to wait one more day, one more month, one more year. That patience is what separates successful retirees from broke ones. The correct amount of cash depends on your spending. If you spend $50,000 a year, hold $100,000 to $150,000 in cash equivalents. That's 2 to 3 years of expenses. It sounds like a lot. It is. That's the point. You want enough runway that even if stocks fall 50% and stay there for 2 years, you're fine. You're not stressed. You're not making decisions based on fear. You're spending treasury bills while your stocks quietly recover. Now let me talk about my own mistakes, because they're more useful to you than my successes. Earlier I mentioned a decision that cost me half my eventual wealth. Let me explain. Decades ago, I bought into a company without truly understanding its long-term durability. On paper, it looked cheap. The numbers were clean. Management seemed competent, but I didn't think deeply enough about whether the business model would last. The result? I made a quick profit and sold too soon. If I'd had the discipline and insight to hold that position, it could have doubled my eventual net worth. That's not hyperbole. That's compound interest doing what it does when you let great businesses run. Compounding doesn't forgive early exits. It punishes them permanently. The mistake wasn't the original investment. The mistake was me. I lacked the discipline to stick with a truly great business. I settled for being right in the short term instead of being rich in the long term. Most investors make the same error. They sell winners too soon and cling to losers too long. It's completely backward. You should do the opposite. But human nature pulls you the wrong way with magnetic force. Owning the right assets is only half the battle. The other half is not destroying them through stupidity. And stupidity in retirement usually looks like one of 5 things. First, impatience. You'll watch stocks go up and feel like you're missing out. You'll get bored holding cash. You'll think your dividend stocks are too slow. That impatience will tempt you to chase something faster. Don't. The fastest way to lose money is trying to make it quickly. Second, envy. Your neighbor will brag about crypto gains or tech stocks doubling. You'll feel stupid holding boring companies. That's when discipline gets tested. Remember, you can't see their losses. You only see their wins. And wins during bubbles always look bigger than they actually are. Third, FER. Markets will crash. They always do. You'll read headlines about economic collapse. You'll feel tempted to sell everything and hide. That's exactly when you need to do nothing. Fear makes people sell assets at the worst prices. Don't be one of them. Fourth, complexity. You'll hear about sophisticated strategies, hedging, derivatives, alternative investments, private equity. They'll sound smart. They're not. Complexity hides risk. It doesn't eliminate it. Stick to what you understand. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough to own it. Fifth, arrogance. You'll have a good year and think you've mastered investing. You'll start taking bigger risks because you feel invincible. That's when you're most vulnerable. Markets punish arrogance faster than ignorance. Stay humble. The goal isn't to feel smart. It's to stay solvent. If you avoid those 5 mistakes, you'll outperform most investors without doing anything heroic. You'll just be the person who didn't self-destruct. And in retirement, not self-destructing is the same as winning. Here's the structure I'd recommend. 40 to 50% in dividend aristocrats for income and stability. 30 to 40% in broad market index funds for long-term growth. 20 to 30% in cash equivalents for liquidity and sanity. That's it. 3 buckets. Simple, durable, boring. You rebalance once per year. You spend from cash first. When cash runs low, you sell from whichever bucket has grown the most. You never sell during crashes. You never chase yield. You never try to time the market. You just sit there like a rational adult and let compounding do its job. This won't make you rich overnight, but it will keep you rich for decades. And keeping wealth is harder than making it. Most people never learn that until it's too late. One more thing. The most important investment isn't in the portfolio at all. It's in your mind. If you stop learning, stop reading, stop thinking, no asset allocation will save you. Your judgment is your greatest asset. Keep it sharp. Read annual reports. Study history. Understand what you own and why. I kept reading into my 90s not because I needed more money, but because I needed to stay mentally alive. A sharp mind compounds just like capital. Maybe more so. In retirement, you're not just managing money. You're managing yourself, your emotions, your discipline, your ability to think clearly when everyone else is panicking. That's the real skill, not picking stocks, but staying sane. If you can do that, if you can structure your finances around endurance instead of excitement, you'll be fine. Not because you were brilliant, but because you were consistent. And consistency over decades beats brilliance every time. Warren and I didn't get rich by being smarter than everyone. We got rich by being less stupid for longer. That's the only edge you need. The 3 investments I've described are tools. They work if you use them correctly. They fail if you panic, chase yield, or confuse motion with progress. So the real question isn't what to own. It's whether you can sit still long enough to let it work. Most people can't. That's why most people fail. Don't be most people. Be boring. Be patient. Be rational. The world will reward that eventually. And when it does, you'll realize something most investors never do. Safety wasn't something you bought. It was something you became.